Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into a high-level executive briefing on a really fascinating and, frankly, highly relevant topic for your portfolios. We're going to break down the macroeconomic state of the 2025 global beverage market, zeroing in specifically on the wine sector using the absolute latest international data. I'll be acting as your analytical guide through this briefing, and together, we're going to unpack exactly what these global production and consumption trends mean for your capital allocation heading into the coming year.
Okay, so let's just jump right in with a massive central paradox that the market is facing right now. Think about this. Why hasn't historically low production caused a global shortage? I mean, in almost any other global commodity market, if you have a sustained multi-year drop in output, prices absolutely skyrocket and you get severe supply bottlenecks, right? But that's just not happening here. The market is actually remaining balanced. So we're going to solve that exact puzzle today.
Here is our roadmap for the analysis. We'll start by defining this current market paradox. Then we'll look at climate shocks and how they're hitting the supply side. After that, we'll explore the new structural demand, assess the broader global economic impact, and finally, we'll weigh the stock adjustments against demand to give you a really clear, actionable picture of the market. Starting with Section 1, the current market paradox. To really understand the underlying economics here, we first have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the initial shock to the global supply chain. Global production for 2025 is sitting at exactly 227 million hectoliters. Now, to put that massive figure into perspective for your risk models, that is 9.4% below the 5-year average. We're talking about only a tiny fractional increase over 2024, and 2024 itself was already a historically depressed year for global output. And here is the crucial part. 2025 isn't just some weird anomaly or a single bad harvest. No, it represents the third consecutive year of historically low global output. For those of you managing agricultural commodities, you already know that a 3-year depressed yield cycle typically triggers severe inflation and aggressive market panic, as buyers just scramble to secure whatever inventory they can. Which brings us to Section 2. What exactly is driving this persistent supply depression? Let's look at climate shocks and supply, the primary catalysts behind all this volatility. The sheer diversity of disruptions squeezing the supply side right now is honestly staggering. We're seeing extreme weather volatility just devastating vineyard yields across both the northern and southern hemispheres. We're talking early spring frosts wiping out buds, excessive rainfall driving up disease pressure across parts of Europe, and on the flip side, prolonged severe droughts in South America. And on top of all that, producers are actively making strategic adjustments, literally uprooting vines and voluntarily capping their own yields to manage the existing oversupply in the market. And the tangible material impact on the major global players? It's severe. Just look at the negative delta compared to their 5-year averages. France is down 15.5%, Spain is down 16.6%, and Chile is facing a massive 25.9% drop, largely due to persistent water scarcity. This right here proves exactly how volatile climate conditions are directly and structurally shrinking global supply margins. Now, moving to Section 3. Basic economics tells us that if supply is shrinking this drastically, we should fully expect a massive pricing squeeze, right? But here is the major market complication. The new structural demand. The demand side of the equation is undergoing a massive, fundamental contraction of its own. Global consumption has effectively settled at a completely new baseline, estimated at 208 million hectoliters for 2025. And I want to be clear here, this isn't a sudden pandemic-style drop. This represents a steady, structural 14% contraction since 2018. The global consumer is fundamentally changing. So why is this happening? Well, we're tracking some deep macroeconomic and generational drivers. For one, younger generational cohorts are simply exhibiting lower overall alcohol consumption rates. Add to that the intense inflationary pressures squeezing purchasing power globally, which naturally leads to more fragmented beverage habits. Furthermore, there's a huge structural contraction happening right now in the Chinese market, which is shifting heavily away from large-scale import consumption. To put a bow on it, 9 of the top 10 global markets recorded lower volumes this year. Demand is undeniably structurally softer. This shifts our focus to the financial fallout in Section 4, the global economic impact. Let's dig into how these dual macroeconomic trends, the shrinking supply and the contracting demand, are disrupting international trade and capital flows. The real financial contraction in international trade is incredibly stark. Volume is down 4.7%, but, and this is much more important for your portfolios, Value is down 6.7% to 33.8 billion euros. This drop isn't just one thing. It's a really complex mix of weaker global demand, broad currency movements, and heightened trade uncertainty. That includes the neutral but very real impact of recent U.S. tariff measures, which have heavily altered international trade flows. But as investors, our job is to figure out where the value is actually being retained in a shrinking market. And the data shows bottled wines still command the vast majority of international value at 66.4%, followed closely by sparkling wines at 24.3%. So even in a contracting macroeconomic environment, premium and packaged formats are exactly where global capital is concentrated. Bulk wine, on the other hand, despite making up over a third of the physical volume shipped globally, it holds a mere 7.3% of the global financial value. Which brings us to our fifth and final section, stock adjustment versus demand. This is where we bring the supply and demand data sets together to finally deliver the core analytical resolution to that paradox we introduced at the very beginning of this briefing. Let's compare these two macroeconomic forces side by side. On the one hand, consecutive years of historically low production are forcing the industry to burn through massive existing surpluses. On the other hand, we have the new structural demand, which has completely retracted to a baseline of just 208 million hectoliters. The absolute climax of our analysis is this. The shrinking production is perfectly offsetting the shrinking consumption. It is literally saving the market from a disastrous supply glut. Because of this, we define this dynamic not as some sort of terminal industry crisis, but as a deeply stabilizing market correction. It's a highly natural process where historically low production is actually acting as a much-needed buffer. It is perfectly aligning those previously inflated inventory levels with the new, distinctly smaller structural demand base of the modern consumer. And honestly, this is perfectly summarized by a key finding straight out of the 2025 OIV report. They state that below-average production will support a gradual easing of stock pressure rather than create shortages. Think about that. The very thing that usually causes sheer panic in an agricultural commodity, 3 consecutive years of crop failures, is exactly what is providing the sector with financial stability today. Ultimately, this completely reframes how we need to look at the sector for 2025 and beyond, which leads us with one final, absolutely critical question for you to consider today. With this new, smaller, structural demand and a market actively correcting its own massive inventories, where exactly is your capital positioned? Are you aligned with the premium value sectors that are actually retaining capital, or are you exposed to the contracting volume plays? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structural breakdown helps sharpen your investment strategies moving forward.